Welcome to the Life Giver Podcast. This is your host, Corie Weathers. I'm a clinician, military spouse, and advocate, and my co-host for this season is Sarah Foster, a first responder spouse, mom, and homesteader. Join us for Season 7, where we invite you into honest conversation about life, family, and home. So grab that cup of coffee or head out for a walk. It's time to reconnect with what matters most.
Through all the storms, I'm by your side. Through days of warmth, I'm by your side. Like the stars and the moon in the nighttime sky, I'm by your side.
Welcome to the Life Giver Podcast. This is your host, Corie Weathers, and my co-host, Sarah. It is going to be the last episode of Season 7. You might, if you've been listening for a long time, you're probably going, what? Like, usually I do like 25 episodes in a season. Sarah and I have talked a lot about focusing on what matters most, that it maybe shouldn't be a million things that we're focusing on at once, but coming down to like, what are the most important things and can it be really simple? So here we are. This is the last episode of Season 7. So Sarah, I just want to start off by saying, man, I have really, really, really enjoyed bantering with you and having you as a co-host. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who just love listening to Sarah and her just spontaneous, funny comments that just make you burst into laughter, which apparently I've been doing a lot of that this season for sure. So Sarah, thank you for taking the risk and joining me this season. I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it too. It just feels natural and fun, and it's been good to just have conversations with you. I think a lot of us wish that they could have conversations with you. So just to sit down and be like, yeah, let's talk about these things. And so I've really enjoyed being on, and I appreciate just you welcoming me in to it, and even listeners too, because I know I've secretly shared with you, like, what if everyone's like, get this girl out of here? Like, why do you have her? I'm like, we only want to hear you. Like, put her away. So big thank you to everybody who has allowed me to be on and listen to my thoughts as well. So
I love it. And I appreciate the way that you've defined certain terms and kept me organized along the way. And I probably laughed more in this season than I have in any season, all combined. And so thank you for the joy in my life. But we were talking just a few minutes ago about like, how do we wrap up a season on reconnecting with what matters most? We've covered all kinds of things, like how do you create more margin in your life? We've talked about how to make really hard choices in order to create that margin in your life. How do you say no to things? How do you build community better? We've also had some like wonderful couples coming on and talking about like how they made choices in their life to not only protect their marriage, but also navigate their career while also taking care of their family and their marriage. And hopefully you guys have really enjoyed that. I've definitely enjoyed having couples on and hearing their story. So it's been a really thought-provoking season. And hopefully it's had some recentering effect on all of you that were listening. So Sarah, I would love to just kind of come to you. And, when we first started this season, we talked about defining this kind of full circle idea of like, there's so much imperfection in the journey and in living and embracing that imperfection and how we're not going to get it right. But there's also something about coming full circle to I think circling the wagons, Matt and I say that all the time, of like protecting your family and really defining your values of what matters most. And so I would just love to hear from you. Like, what have your thoughts been on the season? When you look back, like what stands out to you? What did you maybe learn?
Well, I feel like this tends to happen, but I feel like once you get a theme, then, or at least for me, then I see it everywhere. It's kind of like when like, you're like, I'm going to buy a minivan. And then all of a sudden you see Toyota minivans, like everywhere you look, and you're like, I didn't realize so many people had that. But, so I feel like with all that deep thought, cause yes, I'm always in deep thought as well, that, I just have been surprised, but not really, at how much I can tie into that theme of just reconnect and the thought of circling back. And more so, I've started to think like that it maybe isn't even just one circle, that I almost think of it as circular, like almost like a spiral, because I feel like as we've recorded these and I've had to think about those topics, and then I've also been just living my own life and seeing that same theme pop up, that I keep circling back to decisions that I made or commitments that I made, whether that's circling back to my marriage or circling back to the way we envisioned raising our children or whatever. I've had to like reevaluate and come back because life is always changing. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like even that definition of reconnect, because as we started this podcast today, I was like, I don't have any words to define because this is like the wrap up. Like, there's like no definitions needed. But what was funny is when I was pulling out my notes, it just kind of fell out of my page. The original definition of reconnect of like coming back to what matters most. And I thought, it's so interesting because I have done that myself in the time that we've been recording, of like circling back to what matters most and allowing that to look different in different seasons. And I feel like we're probably going to get into this a little bit, but it's been like it's the same theme, just applied somewhat differently. Like as I transitioned to having no longer little babies, like nobody's cuddling me. They're all just talking at me nonstop. And it's not super thought provoking. It's actually a bad thing. And so what does that look like? Like how do I connect with them or whatever? So, and I just feel like, it's a theme that isn't going to go away with a podcast. It's one that I'm going to just continue to carry with me, of that. Even when I think about when you were talking about that there's not as many episodes, and it's kind of what I see even in that picture, again, going back to that circle, is like almost like a momentum build of like, it felt for a while when we were talking about reconnect, it was like reconnect for this and this and this. And it was like, we had all these episodes and then it just went whoop and circled back to the top. Like it just rose back up to the top of like, and that's done, and it's not like a done, never to return, but that's how I'm starting to just see our life is already built like that, with seasons and even traditions. Like you circle back to the same ones over and over and over again, but yet you're also moving forward. So now I'm starting to see it more as like I said, a spiral of like, I'll reconnect again and again and again and again, hopefully always coming back to the things that matter most to me. So
I love that picture. In fact, I actually use a spiral metaphor for time all the time when I'm talking with people, because I really, you have to kind of follow my thinking on this, but I feel like time is more like a spiral than it is like a linear line. Like it's really easy to, like, the clock keeps ticking and we just we think of timelines as being a linear line. Whereas I see life and time moving more like a spiral. And there's something about things come full circle all the time. You're right, whether it's seasons, but there's also things that we go through in our life that if you look back over time in your life, there's these themes that keep popping up in our life, right? And there's different themes for each person. If you went through abuse in your childhood, like you have to revisit that in your relationships and what it means to have trusting relationships. You have to revisit that when conflict comes up, or if you find yourself in an abusive relationship. It's almost like it spirals back around and gives you this opportunity of, are you going to grow through this? Are you going to evolve? But we can't evolve if we don't circle back, rethink it, and evolve it to the next level. That's why a spiral is moving forward, but it still loops on itself, right? And so whether it is trauma that you've experienced in your life, you have these new opportunities to reconnect with that trauma and evolve it forward. You can't erase it from your life. You have to evolve it forward. Or, we can apply it to joy-filled things too, like raising your kids that you brought up, right? Like you have moments to reevaluate what family means to you, what quality time means to you, and evolve it forward. Like you just said, my kids are older, quality time is changing, conversations are changing. How do I reconnect with my value of, I want to have a close connected relationship with my kids, but I've got to reconnect with that value. And then I have to redefine it and live it out differently each time. So did you have any favorite episodes, Sarah, from the season?
It's hard to pick because I felt like every time we did one, I'm like, I like that. I like that. I really liked Mark and Carolyn. That was probably one of my favorites. Just, I really enjoyed listening to them, but it's hard for me, like shout out to Mark and Carolyn. Cause I'm like, well, the other stories were good too. Like I don't want it to sound like, I didn't really care because they all brought something so different. And I think what I liked too, formatting wise, is like those breaks of like, we would talk about topics, but then look, here's how someone did that, and that it is possible. And it's not just about talking in theory, but that you actually can, like, there's fruit there to be seen, that when hard choices are made or people slow down, that you can see, that there's something richer waiting for you on the other end of that, that it's not, like I said, it's not just theory. It's like practical application of people who are on the other side of it as well. Because I have a friend who, she always says, like, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And it's really true. And so if you are starting off thinking like, well, that sounds nice, but it was nice to see people who had made those decisions and actually changed, and it did change things.
Yeah.
Because I think that can be the lie sometimes, that it'll always be this way, or this just is what it is, or, whatever. But actually, like, no, you can stop, pause, and you really can. And in this lifestyle specifically, we talk so much about not having control, because it's very true. Like our schedules aren't controlled, our, where we live isn't controlled always, or when we work or whatever. But there actually is a whole lot of control that we have, really mainly within ourselves, to decide and make different decisions and break patterns and step out into new ways. So I really enjoyed listening to those like real life applications.
Yeah.
So
when I look back on it, I see how really in the process of reconnecting with what matters most, when we want to simplify things, there's really no way to do that without work. Like it is, I mean, all of the stories, my aunt, Jennifer Clark, Mark and Caroline, Lori and Jeff Hawkins, like all of these stories were of people who wanted something in their life. And I missed our first responder couple too, of like overcoming trauma, right? Like all of these stories, everybody wanted something to change and needed something different in their life, but had to like work on it to not only simplify their life, but also maintain that. And it wasn't just about like setting the boundaries. It's like, now we have to maintain those boundaries. And what does it mean to actually daily invest on the things that matter most in our life, so that we actually reap the benefit of having a more simplified existence, I guess, if you will. So that's what I look back on and I go, wow, like all of these stories of change that people are living in, they put forth the work and the effort to do it, to heal, to, Mark, setting boundaries at work and investing in his home, Caroline investing in her health and her wellness, Jeff and Lori, deciding like what were their values and then how do we hold to that, and there's great discomfort in holding that. It sounds like glamorous to like just be in an RV, but to like live that every day and not go back on that choice or do something different or allow discontentment to creep in or whatever, takes work. So it's kind of like what you said, Sarah, about even managing a homestead. Like it's a simplified life. And you and I have talked about that in recording these episodes, but also outside of recording, we've talked about like this great desire to simplify your life also has required a lot of work.
Oh yeah. Like, and that's what I got that analogy when we were talking. I'm like, it's not, it's that the difference of like, I want to buy a homestead, like, but that doesn't stop. It doesn't stop there. So like when we say, I want a simple life, like it doesn't stop there. Like once you get the simple life or you've limited it or you narrowed it down to these core things that I need to now start prioritizing, like there is a lot of tending to. And as someone who is not consistent, that is the most laborious part, is like the tending. Cause I'm a pendulum swinger. Like I'm like, you can visit and be like, oh, she's so organized. It's not true. It's that I like let it get so bad. And then I just freak out and do everything at the same time. Like I'm always one or the other. And so Kenny we were just talking about that with like, the amount of screen time that we give our kids, and summer has been really lax. And so I'm like, so I told them no shows because I'm just seeing all kinds of behavior. And it's like, that's really how it is with you. It's like all shows or no shows. Like they're just going to have to learn to like, because I'm like, he's like, I don't know if you're ever really going to fix that. That's just going to be kind of how you tend to go, but there is room for growth and recognizing. And so back to like the homesteading and the maintenance, like, yes, there's a lot of like, we were filling potholes yesterday. My son was like, when we become farmers, we're going to have to do a lot more than this. I said, I hate to break it to you. We already are farmers. How many people do you know fill in potholes like all day long, like, on their 1/4-mile gravel driveway? I mean, maybe you're out there, but not many of us. So, but I think that's the stuff that you don't think about. Mm-hmm. And I think too, in the society that we live, you see what you want and you think you can just have it. Like that, like you can consume it, like, and that what all the topics we talked about this season is about cultivating, and consumption and cultivation are very different. Yeah. Think of like consumption, like McDonald's, but then like think of like cultivation as like, it's not instant gratification. There are times where you're going to suffer loss. There are times when you're going to have to, press through difficulty and feel like it's in vain. And then there will be times of great harvest. Like it's more dynamic. Consuming is I eat the meal, it's gone. Yeah. Like, but cultivating is hard work, circling back, dealing with loss. And that will always continue. There is no set it and forget it. There is no Instapot of real relationship that you can just set it and it be done. So yes. We have talked a lot about like whether or not we should, I debate sometimes you think I'm off grid now. I entertain like, we don't need water. We'll just get a composting toilet. Like, 500 square feet. Then I won't have to clean anything. Like, that's, but there's a whole lot of work that comes behind those little YouTube channels where they look like they're living their best life with their composting toilet. Like they don't show you how much they have to do with it,
But I mean, at the same time, it really comes back to what we've been talking about, which is how badly do you want it? Uh-huh. So for example, we've talked about like staying home with your kids, teaching your kids going to school. Some of you are thinking about, do I go get a job? What kind of job do I get? And all of those are based off of like, what is it that you're wanting and how badly do you want it? And what does that mean to go after that? And it requires sacrifice and no on some things in order for you to have that, and it goes back to that conversation about hard choices. So I highly recommend that if you're kind of in that place of like, man, I have all these options in front of me and I don't know, like I want to, let's say, go back to work, but I also want to stay home with my kids. Like that's a hard choice. And then you have to decide, what do you value the most? And it's okay for some of you to go, this is a time in my life where I really either need to work or our family needs for me to work, or I need to exercise my brain, and that I need to value that more than the mom guilt that I'm carrying. But some of you are not in that place and you're not necessarily needing a career, and you really want the permission to just stay home with your kids, and that can be enough, and that it's okay to value that. So there's lots of distractions out there that kind of invite us to value new things and have new ideas and look at what everybody else is doing. And the world is so loud and consuming everything. You're right, Sarah. There's not a whole lot of lessons on cultivating the one thing or cultivating the two things that you value most. And it's really easy for, I know me, maybe for a lot of other people, but it's really easy for me to start cultivating something and then get distracted with more things to start because I wasn't comfortable with the discomfort of the work. Right? Like it would be really easy for me to abandon the potholes to go tend to the garden because that's more rewarding. Another thing we could talk about as we wrap up this season is, that reconnection and values look different for all of us. And so I know for me, I just launched my son into college 2 weeks ago, and that has been a huge like life marker step, to go through. And Sarah, you're in a generation where you said earlier, you're not necessarily with toddlers, you're with like, I think elementary school. I don't think you have quite middle school yet. Is that right?
No, we'll be there. So it's 10 and 9 is where I'm at. So
10.
I'm like in this, I guess they call those
Upper
tweens.
elementary
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah, tweens. And so one of the things that I was thinking about was how, we've talked a lot about like, how do you set good, healthy boundaries, and how do you define your values, and how do you make tough, decisions along the way. But I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time talking today about how really it depends on the season you're in too, that your values change based off of your life stage. And you have to give yourself time to evolve into, or if we go back to the spiral, even like loop back on what does family mean to me now that I'm in a new stage. And like, how do we work together with other people at various stages, right? So I know that's a big statement, but I've been thinking a lot about like, wow, I just launched my first kid into college and I knew this time was coming. I've thought about it for a long time, like decade at least, of like, I remember staying at home with my kids and I remember imagining like, what are they going to look like as teenagers? What are they going to look like as adults? What's their personality going to be like? How am I going to feel when I launch them off to college? Or launch them off into adulthood. And I remember being at your stage, Sarah, where I was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of around the corner. And how do I ready this little person for that? And how do I be present? And will they be ready? And I also remember even up until this last year going, did this lifestyle ruin my kids? Like, are they going to go into adulthood hating us for like what we dragged them through? Or are they going to be traumatized from like the difficulty that they've gone through because of it? And, and hoping that what I was saying to them in those tough moments of like, it's all going to be worth it. It will, like, you're going to reach this point where you're going to be able to say like, my character is better for it. And really hoping that was going to be true. Like that they wouldn't like, you lied to me, So there's all these different stages of what's most important. And now that we've launched one and still have one in the house, we're at a place of like, what does it mean to reconnect with what matters most at this stage for us and for us? And then I'd like for you to be able to kind of talk about, Sarah, where you are. For us, it is about still the four of us. It's also about aging parents. It's also about how do I stay connected to my kids now that like one is far away from me, and how you can't have family game night like you used to, so how do I make room in my life to reconnect or stay connected with the people in my life that matter? That takes time, that takes money, that takes energy in a different way than it did before. And prioritizing that. And I remember looking at other spouses or other families that were ahead of me that were kind of like disappearing. Like they were like, I wouldn't see them for a really long time. And it was because they were traveling home to take care of aging parents, or they were traveling to see their kid at college. And they were less involved, in the military, at least, when we would have coffee groups and community events. And like that generation was like not around very often. And now I'm finding myself entering into that space where I'm having to ask myself, well, what matters most to me? So, I'm Generation X, and the force right now, I'm not sure about the first responder force, but I would say the military force is 92% millennials and Gen Z now. And that means I'm in the 8% that's left over. I am not the majority. And so, Sarah, I know you're a millennial. And so I don't know how you feel about that, being called a millennial.
Yeah.
I will say millennials have gained a ton of respect compared to like 10, 15 years ago when everybody was adolescents and needed the grace to figure out their life.
I think millennials are interesting. I think the spread's always the same as far as how many years it captures, but I feel like I sometimes can relate more to Gen X because like I didn't get a cell phone till I was 17.
Mhm.
So I lived most of my childhood in a different world than like the kid who was born when Toy Story came out, which I
Yeah.
think is also a millennial, you know what I mean? So yeah. And then I also have done kind of a study too, where I've thought, cause I have cousins who are like through and through millennial, and they're not that much younger than me. But they grew up in more urban settings and I was in more rural settings that were like just countrified. We were slower. We didn't have a computer. That wasn't what you did. I watch movies now from the 90s. I'm like, people had computers? Like I didn't get Windows 98. Like I didn't so I think your income, like during that time determined, how much of that was influencing your childhood or your adolescence or whatever. But yes, I am a millennial. I don't know how I feel about it, but I am one.
Well, I wanted to take a minute and kind of like talk through the different generations and what these different generations are valuing the most. And Sarah, I think you'd be surprised that although I would agree with you, I don't think that you are, and I don't know if I would even just, most people hear millennial and you hear snowflake, entitled, never left home. And that was the beginning descriptor of an adolescent or 20-year-old millennial, but millennials are now 40. So we have to remember that millennials are actually running a lot of the businesses. They have families now. And so just like any other generation, every generation has to learn how to adult, right? And so millennials have evolved past that, like what used to be labeled as the snowflake, entitlement. And I do think that history brings with it, how do you adult with, what millennials were demanding a lot of. And so I think it's shaped how they adult, but I don't think that they're necessarily coming out as entitled as everybody wanted to label them. So just as an example, so I won't spend a lot of time on Gen X because, there's in the force, Gen X is starting to move towards either retirement or we're evolving into like second careers and that sort of thing. But just so that we have context, like Gen X, Matt and I shared this in one of the other episodes that we did, very clearly defined by raising ourselves, a lot of hard work and work ethic, and movies. Everything is shaped by movies like Goonies. Watch Stranger Things, and that's Gen X. So for me, what matters most to me, I raised myself. Matt raised himself. And so family dinners are everything. Spending time with our kids matters at this stage more than our jobs. Like we did the hard work. We've been a rat on the wheel. Like we proved that work ethic. And now we want to be with our kids. And I think every generation is feeling that in different ways. Then you've got your millennials, and millennials are circling back to family, and they're asking themselves, like, how do I raise my kids? And I'd love to hear your feedback on this area, because millennials they were shaped by the helicopter parenting of parents who were constantly present. And some of that came from the older Gen X who raised themselves. The older Gen X raised themselves. And so that translated, the pendulum swung. And so then they raised millennials, especially the older millennials, like, I want to be present in everything because I didn't have anyone present for me. Right. And that turns into helicopter parenting, and it turned into a little bit of entitlement. So I don't know what you feel about that, or what you maybe saw from your peers.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think I'm trying to kind of put it together. Like the millennials that I know are the ones that are like I said, I'm more on like that cusp, like that line, that divider line. And so you're right. Like in the police force, like we are the old ones like now, which is really weird. Because when you're the young one for so long, you kind of think like, I'm always the young one. And then you're like, well, crap, I'm the old mom. Like, and it's like, how old do you think I am? But so looking at some of the younger millennials come in, we still feel sometimes a little bit gapped from them because we didn't have some of the stuff that they like for the 2000s, which is like what was my like defining era. That was, I feel like whatever era you were like a teenager in is kind of what set you in. And I was September 11th. Like that, I remember it. I wasn't in elementary school. I was in high school, but I also wasn't a young adult, which is more Gen X was right there. Right. Cause I'm literally at the cusp. So, but I think, the ones that I see and know, the millennials that I know, it is that thing of like, I feel like we kind of all feel in the group of people I see or that I run in is we feel like we were sold a bill of goods and like go to college and then you have no job. Like go to, so many of us are like, you don't have to go to college. Like that's how like, we're kind of like, not that you can't, but it's not like what we heard growing up was that's the only way you'll get a job. That's the only way you'll, and it was being shaped by, at least for Kenny and I, our both our dads who were hard workers, only had a high school education and got passed up for, things by the college degree kids. So they hammered it into us to get these degrees. And then we come out in an economy that had nothing. And was like, well, where's all your experience? It's like, you made us go to school. We don't have any experience. So, just that, like, so I think it was maybe that did force our generation to like grow up and not be so entitled and have to be willing to reshape, reform, and rethink the way we were being pushed and kind of maybe go back. Now I know my personality is to go back, but I think like you said, to say like, we'll just do it ourselves. If the system, everybody trusted all these systems and those systems failed us. Yeah. So now we are perfectly comfortable with rebuilding like different things and forsaking like tradition or forsaking the old ways for kind of this like, no, we're going to do something better, or we're going to actually at least think about why we're doing what we're doing. Cause I feel like there wasn't a lot of thought in our raising. It wasn't a lot of thought as to like, you just go to college, you just do this, nobody's thinking, everyone's just doing this thing. And then it falls flat on its face. So I think that has shaped us.
That's so, okay. So this is super powerful, what you're saying, because here's what's basically happening. Our generation was, you go be a part of something, you go get the degree and you go be a part of something. And that's how you change the world, get a job, whatever. And then the millennial generation is coming along going, that didn't work for me. And so I have to go build it myself. Like when you look at our culture and the things that have popped up in the last 10 to 15 years, I mean, startup companies, the tech industry, like so much of that was launched from millennials who maybe or maybe not had degrees. Like they were a talent driven generation, less based off of the education. It's like, if there's not a space for me, I'm just going to go start one myself. Which is phenomenal when you think about it. Right. And so when you talk about like reconnecting with what matters most and what drives your motives and what drives your passion, right? It is important to see this from a generational perspective, why you've got an older generation that's like, why would you go and start something new instead of taking what's already been built and making it better? Right. Versus a generation that's like, I'm disappointed with what was offered to me and I can do it better if I build it myself. Or if you don't give me the respect to come in and make it better, then I'll just go create something new. Right. And so, and none of that is wrong or bad. It's just two different generations on what do you value. The older generation valuing what has been established and preserving that, I think, a little bit. And then a newer generation that is valuing creativity, valuing opportunity, valuing, like we were talking about in the beginning, simplifying, that we have the privilege to simplify if we want to. Like, I don't have to trust whatever system is in place when I can do it probably better myself based off of what my values are. Homeschooling, homesteading, going back to that piece of land rather than like the inner city or urban settings, right? Like I can do it better myself based off of what my values are. I value raising my own chickens. So that's what I want to do. And I can learn how to do that now. Right. Yeah. And I don't have to go to get a degree to do that. I've got YouTube. And millennials were the ones that led the way on first putting that information out there. Like, why go to an institution and pay all this money? We could just teach ourselves. Right. Or be an expert in that myself. And so this is really important for understanding what drives you and what's driving each generation, so that when you are forming community with people, when you're trying to set boundaries with people to say, this is how I need to change my life and my world based off of what I value, those decisions like bump up against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it can create conflict and division if we don't understand how those different generations make those decisions and how they value different things for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's what's happening in our culture right now, to see people abandoning the military force, abandoning the police force, because this institution that you could just come in and get a job is now disappointing, I think, the younger generation. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Sarah, because this is, I know, hits home for you probably too personally. But like when you have both the military and the first responder institution is taking huge hits for moral failings. And that doesn't necessarily reflect everybody in the force. Not everybody is making those moral decisions that are being blasted all over the news, but it affects the overall institution, where people are like, I don't want to align myself with that institution. I'd rather just go do something myself. And so I know military, we are not reaching recruiting numbers because people are seeing that and going, why would I want to be a part of something when I can just go start something myself? Mm-hmm. Or why align myself with the police force when justice no longer feels good?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got people like Kenny that are like, but this matters.
Yes, but I think he just said this to me the other day. We were talking about the boys and whatever they wanted to do when they grew up. The boys weren't around. And he goes, I hope to God they don't want to be a cop. And it made me think of Matt, because his dad was like that, right?
Yeah.
It like instantly made me think of that. And I just thought how interesting, and also how sad, because it does mean something to him, but it also has become so, okay, we're talking about what we value and entitlement, right? We talked about like millennials with like entitlement. Entitlement would be like, I should be the president of this company, even though I am 19, like, or whatever. And I have worked one job. That's entitlement, right? Not willing to work hard. But value though, and what I see, at least in like police world, is no one's being valued.
Yeah.
And that's kind of true even in, I think about when I was trying to map out what my reality became as an adult, as a millennial entering into like adult world. One of the things, like even what you said, it was about getting a job and then linking up with something and being devoted maybe to that company. And there was opportunity to rise within that company or to stay true to something. And what we saw in our adult life was like, AT&T is going to offer the new customer a free phone, but you have to keep paying for yours. There's no value to people and what they give, and there's no, it's not a give and take. And so then you crank up the heat and you do have moral failures and you do get really bad associations, and the name of like just speaking to police gets drawn through the mud, but none of the other stuff went away. You're still getting shot at. You're still getting expected to work like swing shifts of like, now you're on days. Oh, nope. Now you're on mornings. Oh, nope. Now you got to come in at 2 a.m. and it's changing. And you're expected to have really no life. This society doesn't value you. Your paycheck doesn't value you. The company you work for, well, not the company, but the office, the sheriff's office that you work for is treating you like a number.
Yeah.
Why would someone want to come into that? And why would you wish that for anybody, no matter how meaningful the work? You get to a point where like that can only even take you so far of like the meaning ascribed to it, of knowing like, yeah, this is true and good, even if it's being misrepresented or it isn't being perceived as good. But yet you're a person. And at the end of the day, you can only take so much. And one of the things that's happening, that I was just talking about with another friend in law enforcement is, there's so if you want to leave your department because maybe you don't like what's happening, you try to go to a different one. The entry level position is that you have to be on swing shifts. So you got people who are like 15-year veterans that are like, I'm not working a swing shift. But I think you even have 20-year-olds that are like, why would I do that? Like, so you're going to give me $30,000 and I've got to work. I've got to just work whatever you want me to. Like I think there's these younger generations are asking, yeah, but do you value me? And there is a difference between entitlement and value, of feeling like I'm not your slave. I'm not your commodity. Like, and I think those younger ones are maybe tired of that,
Absolutely.
and asking those questions,
Yes, absolutely. And add to that, Gen Z is already fueled and fired up with that same value mindset, because Gen Z is known as, sounds very sad, but it's true. Gen Z is called the mass shooter generation. Mm-hmm. And that's terrible, right? But they are already coming into the workplace like the world is an unsafe place. The world is an untrusting place. And I have talent and I'm not going to just give it to anyone. And so like, I want to be treated better. Like I deserve to like be in a school that I feel safe in, or I deserve to like, so they're coming in with a worldview that is oversaturated with information. So here's what I mean by that. You were just talking about not feeling valued. Well, before social media and the internet and all of this information and the visibility, like you enter a job and you don't know that there is toxicity of leadership, or you don't know that there's mistreatment until you get passed over for that promotion, right? You give that loyalty, you give that work, you put your dues in, right? And then over time, you start realizing maybe what this organization is about. Maybe you're not a good fit for it, and you can decide whether or not you leave that organization, or whether it's worth it to work harder to try to get that promotion next time, right? Or maybe everybody is dealing with a toxic boss, right? And so it's just what you do. If you stick with it long enough, you get promoted. But what's happened is like the visibility is so great now that like you have it broadcast everywhere, the mistreatment. It's easier to know before you even enter the job what I'm entering into. Like it's, why join the police force if I've got to wear a body camera, and if I get one thing wrong, it's like I'm canceled in the cancel culture now. And people form their opinions about me too. The risk is much higher. And the cockroaches, if you will, the flaws in the system are exposed from the beginning. And so you decide from the beginning whether or not you want to even align yourself with something, when all of that is not only being exposed, and I can make the choice whether or not I enter it and put my talent there, or whether I risk being aligned with something that could taint my character. And like you're saying, it's just not worth it to a lot of people, right? And so 64% of Gen Z don't trust the government. And I think that includes both forces as well. Trust the institutions. I think you could kind of fill in the blank instead and say they don't trust the institutions, because so much more is visible before, And so I think that I love the way that you define that, of just going, it's not entitlement. It's just wanting to be valued and wanting to bring something to the table that's valued. And if it's not valued, then can I take it elsewhere? And I know the military system is relooking at their pensions and their retirement system, and it is going to have huge consequences of people being recruited and staying with the job if it's not worth it to cross that 20-year finish line. People would rather take their talent elsewhere. And so this is all goes back to our Reconnect, because this is all about like, what matters most to you, and how do you make decisions of what matters most to you, and how do I take care of my family, and how do I make those tough decisions when we're exhausted and we're tired and we've endured some really hard things. And I've heard you say it, Sarah, so honestly, and I have been so grateful that this season you've been honest with your feelings. I think it's opened up a lot of, hopefully, some eyes on the first responder experience and on relationships and what that's like to live that every day. But I think it also mirrors what I think the military families are experiencing too, of this has been really hard for a really long time. And it's really easy to get to a place of like, do I really want to do this anymore? Because my family has value, my wellness has value. And measuring that up against what is now visible in the system of like, what does it mean to put people first? And that's what I think millennials started to ask is like, we need to put people first here, families first. And I know the Army did a whole people first movement, but that's why everybody is experiencing some resentment on the military side of you said people first, but we're not actually treating people first. So now what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not encouraging everybody to just abandon your careers. What I'm trying to express here is there is an undercurrent of weariness and frustration. And I think that's what launched us into this season in the first place, Sarah, is like we're coming out of great trauma from COVID, great trauma from seeing our whole culture kind of implode and become divisive and attacking itself and mistrusting of itself, mistrusting generations that we're living with too. And it's just been, we're coming out of a lot of trauma that has made us ask the question, like, what really matters in my life? And what do I do about that?
Mm-hmm. I guess it'll be interesting how it plays out, but I think it's something that I hadn't considered prior to you asking, like in this conversation of just being like, well, map out your adult experience and then tell me why you're doing what you're doing. And I'm like, oh, it's really true. Like, it's mix of a mistrust and then it's time to value things and value people. And that I think gets lost in a consumer driven culture because people consume people and that just isn't going to work till people finally are like, you know what, I'm kind of tired of that. So
I don't want to leave everybody with like, oh my gosh, things are terrible. And I need to go to have a marriage discussion on whether or not we should quit the lifestyle. So that's not exactly what I wanted to present. The whole point I think of the Life Giver podcast has been to have honest conversation about like, how are we feeling? What's the truth of what's happening? And then what do we do with that? Right? Like, how do we move forward? Because I always say, like, we're going to, somebody said they wanted to have a pocket Corie because I use that phrase, like, let's just sit in the pocket for a little bit. They're like, well, I'd like to have a Corie in my pocket, which was really funny to me one time. But like, there is like, we have to sit in the pocket of the truth and then we have to like move forward. Right. Mm-hmm. And so everybody is in a different season, in a different stage. That's why I wanted to do a podcast with Jeff and Lori Hawkins on what does it mean to move into a different season and have your life not be attached to the service lifestyle anymore. And that's important to be thinking forward. And Jeff offered great wisdom to go, it will end. Like you can't over-identify with a job so much that you crumble on the other side of it because you didn't think of who you were apart from that. Right. So that's really, really important. And it's great wisdom to have. And so the honest conversation here is to go, this is hard. Why is it hard? There is truth in the fact that we all come to this lifestyle for different reasons. And for different values. Some of you are Gen Z and you are coming into this lifestyle because it offers financial security and jobs where you would have otherwise struggled. Like I'm shocked that my son is considering signing up for the Air Force, but his reasons are, hey, like they're going to pay for my college and I'm guaranteed a job. Yes. And I only have to give 4 years. Okay. Like, and that's a lot of Gen Z right now is the benefits and the security, but not necessarily long-term loyalty and job security. It's just the initial launching of possibly a little bit of that consumer mentality of like, before I have a ton to offer, I'm willing to consume what you give me, which is the job, right? And the benefits. And so it is Gen Z coming into it for that reasons. Millennials, I think, are still trying to improve it where they can. I think millennials are staying in it because they have some, like I think where you are, Sarah, and your family, where we've been in it for a while. So it feels uncomfortable to just leave it, right? Because we're not quite done with it yet. What can we do to make it better? And if we can't, then we'll launch some other things on the side that makes us feel like we have some control and that we're doing things in other ways. Homeschooling, nutrition. There's so many physical fitness. Like there's so many things that I think millennials have done a great job launching and saying, I can do it better than what I've seen. And there's some of us that are Gen X that are like kind of nearing the end of the finish line. And there's no way we're going to leave an institution, even if it has its flaws And there's probably a lot that are even older than me that are going, why are we even talking about it anyways? We should be hiding it, right? Which is not always the best answer as well. And so it's about having the honest conversation. And then what do we do with the stage of life that we are currently in? I don't think it's ever worked for anybody to just abandon things impulsively because of our emotions. Like that is not always the best way to handle frustration, right? We want to be wise with our decisions. There are seasons of life where we do have to put the hard work in before we're going to see like going back to your cultivation, before we see the product of it. And a career is very similar. Some of you who are just launching into the career, you may have some time to adjust and say, you know what, gardening is not for me. Farming is not for me. And you may look at this lifestyle and go, this lifestyle is not what we thought it was going to be. And we have time to adjust and go do something different. And others of you have been in for a while and you're like, I'm not getting good zucchini this season. And I didn't have good zucchini last season, but we are thriving and we're okay. And me or my spouse love the job and we have a passion to do it. And there is joy in the cultivating. It's just a really hot summer, And so it's worth it to stick around, because abandoning it just because there's a drought this summer could be abandoning a lot of things without something else lined up to know what to do with it. But there's also room, depending on which generation you are, there's room to still make your world better with the strengths that you have individually and the strengths that you have within your generation. Like my generation, Gen X, it's okay to say out loud, it's not okay for it to stay this way. I don't have to abandon it, but I also have to speak the truth. And what I am seeing is that when Gen X are speaking the truth, everybody is very relieved. When we are in a room and we go, families are struggling, teenagers are struggling, we need more resources, we need better care for people. Everybody is nodding in the room and saying, thank you for saying it out loud. Thank you for at least valuing people enough to start the conversation. And I think millennials are saying it shouldn't be this way. And this is where I had this thought this morning of interesting that millennials are now, I think, leading a lot of both the first responder culture and the military culture. They are now in leadership. And here is where the millennials have to be able to say, as leaders, what does change look like so that we don't lose these institutions completely? If we are going to actually be leaders, what does change look like? How do we change it for the better? How do we say, yes, something does need to change. People do need to be valued. And we've got to rethink some of this. But here is a question I've been pondering. I'm just curious if millennials were raised to not have a ton of accountability. For example, going back to the original label, millennials were raised with and I know this was people making fun of millennials back then, but if everybody got a trophy, right? And there was really not a ton of accountability. And having to lose or get things wrong and fail and evolve, going back to the spiral, if we didn't have to do the hard work to evolve and develop a depth of character and get better, we could just quit the sport and go do something new, right? Then we have to have the character development to say, how do we allow ourselves to be held accountable to evolve? If things are going to change and get better and you want it to get better, instead of quitting, how do we say, I'm going to make it better, and then be willing to be held accountable and stick with it long enough to see change happen? Sarah, your thoughts on that as a millennial? Because that's a really tough, oof.
Well, I think when you're saying that is, I like it because Certainly those are themes that I see in my life. Like I wouldn't have thought I still grew up in like very blue collar, like you do work hard. Like I had like 3 jobs, like always. And no one made me do that, but I was like, why not? Like, just keep getting the money, like, or whatever with your little $5 an hour or whatever it was. But I think like those are themes that I feel like I have had to revisit in my life of like, what was I expecting? And am I expecting it to never be hard? And do I just quit when it's hard? Like, and I feel like that is a message to that maybe specific generation. And I do agree. I mean, you're always going to get varying degrees of how people were raised in that generation. And so maybe that was going on maybe more at the school, but I necessarily wasn't raised like that in my home to just quit whatever. But I think it is true, like that you don't have to necessarily even if that is like where you struggle, like maybe that is how you struggle of like, you want to bail anytime it gets hard. And maybe that does speak to your generation. You also, as a person, like you said, you can evolve and you can make different changes. And honestly, that's maturing. Yeah. Like, and that is, I've thought a lot about that this year of like, it sounds so silly, but literally on my 35th birthday, we were traveling and something just kind of came in my head that was like, it's time to grow up. Now I'm a very responsible person. I'm not like being reckless in my relationships or with my commitments, but there was something in my head that was like, it's time to just grow up and stop complaining, like stop like crying about how everything is so hard and accept that hardship is in life. And what does that look like? And so, I don't know. I think it is hopeful to know that while it's insightful to know where maybe our weaknesses are or why our perspectives are the way they are because of the pocket of time we were born and raised and came into adulthood in, it's also good to know that you still have control over that. And that that what is timeless is our ethics and morals and virtues. Good grief, where did virtues go? Like those things are timeless, and we all have the ability to tap into those things, to be of someone of upstanding character, which means to have tenacity and to not quit and to not always, look at what you're getting out of it, but to pour into others. All those kinds of things are timeless. And so we can choose, and that's what it takes to do the hard work and grow past even our limited worldviews or our perspectives that ensnare us.
Yeah. And I want to encourage everybody that when you are trying to change something, be aware of the generations that are around you and how they receive your ideas for change. It's not that everybody is unable to change. It just means each generation changes things in a different way. Right. And so if you are a millennial or a Gen Z and you're trying to especially change a whole institution, you have to build relationships with the other generations to help them understand why you're wanting to change an institution that they were taught to just join and like keep your head down and get through. Or that invoking change too soon can be interpreted by older generations as disrespectful, because older generations are going to say we gain wisdom from people above us, whereas younger generations now are saying we have a lot to offer and we expect this to be a two-way conversation. And so it's not that it shouldn't evolve. It's not that it shouldn't change. Change has to happen. And that's what every new generation is meant to do, is to evolve things. But we can't evolve things in a silo or in a vacuum and just expect everybody to get it, right? We have to form relationships. We have to learn communication. We have to do what I think we've lost, especially since COVID too. Add COVID plus social media and you stir it up in a pot together, and everybody's not even sitting across the table from each other anymore. We're just demanding things and expecting everybody to agree, right? We've got to be able to have conversations with people and go, this is why something needs to change. Here's how I'm proposing it should change. What are your thoughts or questions on that? Right? And then let that older generation offer the wisdom of, we either tried that before and here's what happened, or here's how we almost did that before and here's the lessons learned from it. Right? Or here's how we can help you. like, here's how we can help you with that generation that's really hard to get on board. Let us be those influencers with those other people in the generation. So there has to be conversation instead of forcing things or just expecting things. And I don't fault everybody for wanting to try. I think really the ultimate root issue here was what's happened to us with COVID, isolating everybody and being oversaturated with an information generation of just, we have access to so much information that's shaped our culture in new ways. And we can speak from all of our soapboxes. But then what you have is a whole community and culture all standing on their soapboxes, but nobody listening. So you have incredible things to offer, and there's incredible ways to shape the service lifestyle, whether you're on a first responder side or a military side, but you cannot do it in the absence of building relationships. And that's where you have to decide, going back to Reconnect, what do you value more? Do you value more correcting or changing the institution or people? Because everybody got into this for people and a job, right? But you're in it probably because you needed your family to be taken care of. And so we do that through relationships. So I know this one was a little bit of a heavier one, but I think that it was really important to kind of have a whole season on, like, how do you figure out what matters most to you in your life? But I mean, what a way to kind of end this season with whatever matters most to you. I think we could all look back over the season and say, really, I think it's all come down to people, our family, ourselves, and taking care of ourselves. But it's also each other. And so if you need to make some life changes in your life, I would encourage you to sit down and write down, like, what is most important to you and why? And then how does this lifestyle fit into that? And you might be in a season where, you know what's most important is my toddlers or my kids needing the medical benefits that, let's say, the military offers. And so we're going to have to endure some tough things, but that's what we value the most, is having that medical care. And it's worth it to put up with whatever the lifestyle might be handing us. But you might be in a different generation or a different season of life where you're like, you know what, I've given so much to this military lifestyle, and I'm going to cross whatever finish line that's here for me, but I'm tired and I'm weary, and I need to reconnect with rebuilding myself and investing in my older kids or my aging parents. And so that's what I need to reconnect with. That's what matters most. And so I might be distancing myself a little bit from this lifestyle in order to focus on those things. And that both of those are good. Sarah, thank you for the extra time today. Thank you for always bringing such powerful metaphors and your deep thoughts, and your countering my bantering back and forth. Thank you for joining me this season and opening up my eyes to your world too, not just your homesteading world, but like your first responder relationship and family and lifestyle. And I hope everybody that's listened to you this season sees that police officer or that firefighter or that EMS worker and just offers that grace of how much you guys offer our community and how much you've been through in the last 2 years, and that you guys also need relationships, and you need friendships, and you need kindness. And so thank you for inviting us into your world this season.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Life Giver podcast. We keep things pretty simple around here and don't include sponsors so that you can get our focused attention. So please subscribe, leave us a quick review, or share it with other service families you know. If you would like more information or want to connect, you can find out more by going to CorieWeathers.com or life-giver.org for tons of content and resources, and encouraging you to create more margin in your life as well.